Yesterday, the Russian president announced military mobilization in a special decree. Massive demonstrations were organized across the country to protest against this decision. Force was used against the protesters. Over 1,300 people were detained in 38 Russian cities. This criminal conflict continues to deepen. Putin is trying to get as many people as possible into all of this. It will make them complicit in the bloodshed of hundreds of thousands of people. This war will lead to a huge tragedy, a huge number of deaths. According to the findings of Ukrainian intelligence, at the beginning of the war, the Russians engaged 120,000 soldiers in the fight. Almost half of them died in the course of hostilities. The losses will be supplemented by over 300,000 new recruits. Russia really has the ability to mobilize these people, while it still needs time to do so. But I also have to mention that Ukraine also has its capabilities. Only at the moment, they have mobilization reserves of 1 million people. The third day of the UN General Assembly's high-level debate is taking place in New York. President Volodymyr Zelensky demands the creation of a special tribunal to punish Moscow for war crimes in Ukraine.
A crime has been committed against Ukraine, and we demand just punishment. The crime was committed against our state borders. The crime was committed against the lives of our people. The crime was committed against the dignity of our women and men. The crime was committed against the values that make you and me a community of the United Nations.
The talks of world leaders focus on yesterday's speech by Vladimir Putin and the nuclear threats it contains. The leaders declare continued support for Kiev in the unequal war with Moscow.
This is a decisive moment in our history, in the history of this organization and in the history of freedom. The story of 2022 could have been that of an authoritarian state rolling its tanks over the border of a peaceful neighbor and subjugating its people. Instead, it's a story of freedom fighting back. In the face of rising aggression, we've shown that we have the power to act and the resolve to see it through. But this can't be a one-off. This must be a new era where we commit to ourselves, to our citizens, and this institution that we will do whatever it takes to deliver for our people and defend our values.
Member of the Permanent Security Council is violating the most basic tenets of what the UN stands for. This is why Canada continues to stand strongly in support of Ukraine, to hold Putin to account, and to ensure that countries around the world understand that this attack on the sovereignty, on the territorial integrity, on the well-being of an independent country like Ukraine is absolutely unacceptable, and why we continue to ensure that we do everything necessary to make sure Putin and his cronies are held to account for their horrific actions, the illegal invasion, and the war crimes that they're busy committing.
The European Union will prepare the 8th package of sanctions against Russia. The head of EU diplomacy, Joseph Borrell, informed about this after an informal meeting of the community's foreign ministers. In addition to the sanctions, further shipments of weapons to Ukraine are also planned.
Wants to destroy Ukraine by all means, violating international law and the United Nations Charter since the beginning. But now it looks like Russia's Putin wants to destroy Ukraine. And the international community gathered here in New York needs to take full measure of what is at stake.
President Andrzej Duda said yesterday on PBS that Russia is struggling with a collapse of its image, and the decision to mobilize the military caused panic in the society. In recent hours, the Russians began to buy air tickets en masse, which is confirmed by Russian carriers.
Is in a difficult situation. Russia has demonstrated its weakness. What Russia has been doing so far in Ukraine, the aggression and all the outrageous dimensions of the war which Russia demonstrated in Ukraine, as a matter of fact, have turned out to be a failure of Russia. Russia tries to change its tactics at the same time it tries to threaten the world with nuclear weapons. Please bear in mind that at the beginning, before the war happened, the experts were saying it would be enough for Russia to conquer the whole of Ukraine within 72 hours. However, they failed to seize the whole of Ukraine. You can see an attempt to save face in this mobilization, this partial mobilization, which was announced in Russia. Well, it causes a horror among his society because thousands of Russian soldiers have already died in Ukraine. There will be further thousands following. This is going to be the policy of the Russian authorities right now, so we can see a weakness of Russia in this respect.
Meanwhile, action at the front continues. Yesterday, Russian artillery fired missiles at the Ukrainian nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia. As a result of the shelling, the power line was damaged and the operation of several transformers was suspended. The Russians also fired on the nuclear power plant in the Mykolaiv Oblast on Monday.
And direct attacks on the facility. So I'm very worried. One of the things that happened was that a pool where spent nuclear fuel is being cooled became, stopped operations because one pipeline was affected, etc. So anytime something can happen. I've been saying this for many, many months. We are playing with fire. We continue to play with fire. I'm trying to do as much as I can, as fast as I can.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian forces have regained a bridgehead in the Luhansk region and are planning further attacks in response to the successes of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Russians are planning to hold referendums this week that would decide the future of the occupied territories. The plebiscite was planned in the Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia oblasts. Although most residents of these areas have announced a boycott of the referendum, there is no shortage of cases of outright collaboration with the enemy. Everything will be fine. Soon after the referendum, the situation will improve. That's why we are waiting for the vote. Incorporating the areas where the pseudo-referendum will be held into Russia will make it more difficult for the Ukrainian army to recapture them. In a speech yesterday, Vladimir Putin warned that an attack on his country's territory would trigger a nuclear conflict.